period that trial was going on, I really just didn't have a lot of court during those days. So it was beautiful because I was able to actually sit there and watch. And it wasn't something that I consciously thought up. It just started off initially kind of like how how it is when you watch TV shows, be it football or basketball or even award shows, and people are, weighing in, and talking and what have you. It started off just like that, where I'm like, you know what? No, that witness, they shouldn't have said this, or, that was a really good cross-examination by the prosecution, or, the defense attorney really tore that witness up. And what I started to learn, man, is that people were really like, they were watching it right along with me, right? Because that Zimmerman trial was, for our generation, to a great extent, what OJ's trial was, to a lot of the people who were in their 40s and above, like our parents back in the 1990s. And so, like, I found that I went from maybe having, at that point, maybe 1,000, maybe 1,100 Facebook friends to, by the time that trial was over, man, I was almost at the 5,000 limit. And so what I learned is that I picked up a lot of people because they were just following what it is I had to say, my day-to-day. And so I started, eventually, when I started noticing that, I was like, okay, I probably need to do like a little wrap-up most days to let people know, okay, this is what happened, this is what was up. And unfortunately, man, fortunately, it's not, nothing's unfortunate about it, but it's unfortunate, actually, I'm sorry, I take that back, that Zimmerman was able to be acquitted. But Kysii, man, I had predicted it, because as I sat there and watched it, I found that the prosecution, I felt, really made a lot of mistakes in that trial. I mean, I can, just off the top of my head, just remembering back with the Rachel Gentile young lady, like, I didn't think that they had done an adequate job to prepare her to testify. I thought that she was critical because she was the person who was on the telephone with Trayvon and really was the only person who could give us a window into what his state of mind was at that point in time. And so for them to kind of just put that child up there and just leave her wide open for a rigorous and very brutal and bigoted and racist, if I may add, cross-examination of her, I found that to be deplorable. And I thought that was really one area where they pretty much lost that doggone case. And so, I mean, there were plenty others, but that was one in particular that really stuck out to me. And so it was a disappointment to me, like it was to many of us, that child, that justice did not come for him in that form. But what I didn't realize as that ended, because I think that by our very nature as Black people, we tend to try to be optimistic. I mean, no matter how much we have received a raw deal here in America since the first slave ships came over, we still always are hoping and believing that eventually this system of justice is going to work for us. Well, man, it just simply has not. And for me as a Black lawyer, Kysii, I've been blessed in that I win an overwhelming majority of the cases that I try. But at the end of the day, the cases that I actually try are minuscule when compared to the number of cases that eventually have to get worked out through plea bargaining, because they've got such overwhelming evidence against a defendant. And you recognize that, wow, they really are throwing away the key on poor people in general, but definitely on Black and brown people. Okay. And so that bothers me, because a lot of times you sit here and you listen to these politicians, or you listen to lawyers, or you listen to judges talking all of these lofty ideals and the flowery language from the framers of the Constitution and the signers of the Declaration and what have you. And you recognize that even in 2017, that those words are just ideals, man, that at the end of the day, they don't mean anything to many of us. And that is something that's extremely frustrating. And it's not just something that's theoretical to me. I mean, I'm a very large, as you remember, African-American male, stand a little over 6'1", in excess of 300 pounds. And man, I'm telling you, I have had in the last 10 years, despite having a thriving law practice and all the accoutrement that you would consider for, someone to consider me to be successful and what have you, man, my cars get pulled. I have cops talking trash to me, screaming, "Put your hands where I can see." I've been through all of that. And at the end of the day, you're sitting there nervous, thinking to yourself, wow, this cop is actually screaming at me like I have just committed some type of crime or something like that, over maybe speeding or something. And you're thinking to yourself, and I can't even really address it like I want to, because if I give any hint of hostility right now, I might not make it home. And that is obviously the ultimate goal for all of us. And so when I saw Eric Garner getting choked to death, when you see Alton Sterling, another big African-American male, getting choked to death, when you see Philando Castile, man, getting blazed, well, we didn't see the blaze, but you definitely saw him dying on that Facebook Live photo that his girlfriend had the presence of mind, not photo, shoot that she had the presence of mind to do as he lay dying there. You know, at the end of the day, you stop and you think to yourself, like, at what point in time does America as a whole get outraged at what's going on to us? And what frustrates me about that is, you know, sometimes when I'm talking with my white colleagues or whatever, or even when some of the trolls, I call them on Facebook, because, man, don't get it twisted. For all of the Facebook friends and followers I have a whole lot of great white Facebook friends who weigh in and they get it. But it's a whole lot of haters too, bro. You hit it right on the head. And they read everything that I write. They read all the comments that all of you all make, and they disagree, but they're not going to say nothing because many of them are cowards. I mean, I'm just going to be honest with you. They'd rather sit there and stew. But sometimes some of the cowardly types, they'll corner me somewhere. You know, they'll see me in the courthouse, or they'll see me out at my favorite restaurant eating, and like, hey, Chuck Hobbs, I saw what you wrote on that, yada yada yada. You know, I really don't think it's a race thing. And yet I'm like, man, you just lost me right at the I don't think it's a race thing, because it is a damn race thing. At the end of the day, Kysii, if you knew how many times, bruh, I have seen cases, either as a prosecutor or defense attorney, where there has been some young white defendant, woman or male, who has cussed the blue streak at the officer, fought with the officer, taken off running from the officer, and they live to tell, man. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Right,
I mean,
exactly.
They do not get shot about that foolishness. But here we've got our young, like Tamir Rice. He's out there playing cops and robbers, and he gets shot within 1.7 seconds of the cops getting out the car. Right. And so, yeah, you could probably tell from the passion that it's very frustrating to me, because, again, I took an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and you go into court and you see these scales of justice on the walls, and you see Lady Liberty all blinded and what have you. And, man, at the end of the day, you know it's a bunch of bullshit when it comes to your people. And that is something that, again, I will continue to argue and discuss in a very candid way until the day they put me out there in a box, man. Because, again, if we don't say it and we don't address it, no one else will. And so, again, I think we have to keep those matters going. I mean, just like today, for all of the foolishness that's going on with Trump, and I know that we'll talk about some of that. Yep. I felt like most black people today when you recognize that the woman, Betty Shelby, shot that man out there in Tulsa, and at the end of the day, she's acquitted of manslaughter. And that's as easy a case. That's like a layup, man. Like, as a prosecutor, a manslaughter charge is a layup when it comes to somebody being killed, because the standard of proof, you don't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was an intentional killing. It's just a mess up. It's a negligent killing. That's all you have to do, which is, yep, she didn't use reasonable care when she was executing her duties as an officer. And so for me to see them miss a wide open layup like that, it just, you know, at the end of the day, it's like, well, did they miss it? Or are we so, and when I say we, I'm not talking about black people, I'm talking about we as Americans. Right. The majority of Americans are so indoctrinated into believing that, number one, that all police are victims of circumstance, in terms of they're out here protecting and defending, and their jobs are hard because you Negroes are out here committing all these crimes and they're scared of y'all. And so, yes, she was justified to shoot. And we know that's a bunch of bull. But at the end of the day, that's what so many of our fellow Americans believe. And so when defense attorneys like myself, I mean, I've never handled a case like that and never would. Like, if an officer was accused of shooting and killing an unarmed individual, no matter what the race is, if they come to my office, I'll tell them they got to go holler at somebody else, because I just can't do it at the end of the day. But what it comes down to, man, is, again, the justice system just does not work well for us. And at the end of the day, when you recognize that it wasn't set up for us in the first place, except to keep us in a different form of slavery, like, you know, many of these documentaries, like Ava DuVernay's documentary, and a whole lot of other people are writing about all the time, you recognize that, man, the system is working, but it's working like it was designed to, which did not have us in mind. And so that's something that causes me extreme frustration on a day-to-day basis.
Exactly. And that you actually segue into everything else that I was actually bringing up before we take our break. But all these police shootings, man, it was, you know, and the thing is, being being that it's more polarizing, and we have this social media that basically brings magnification upon issues like that. It makes you wonder: has this been going on the whole time? You know what I mean? And now just having the social media to really put this out here. I mean,
well, man, you know what's funny that you say that, indeed, because all right, again, that same Journey to Justice book, and that's what makes this thing so like, wow, what once was still is. Man, Johnny Cochran was talking about when he was a young lawyer in the 60s, man, when the Watts riot happened. He talked about some of the injustices that he saw out there then between LAPD and the citizens of Los Angeles. He talked about two cases in particular, well, actually three cases in his book that still stick out in my head. One was a man named Leonard Deadweiler. There was another, the former football star Ron Settles, and then Geronimo Pratt. And those are the three cases that were nearer and dearer to Johnny Cochran's heart than even OJ was. I mean, OJ put him on the national map, but it was those three cases out there in Los Angeles that made him a celebrity out there in California because of his dogged determination. The Deadweiler case, the man was shot and killed by cops, I believe, while he was driving his pregnant wife, whose water had broken. He was driving her and speeding to get her to the hospital. Cops tail him because he's speeding, and instead of saying, hey, we're going to clear the lane and help y'all get to the hospital, they shoot that man right there as his wife is sitting there in labor, okay? That was the first big case he had. Then Ron Settles was an athlete there, superstar football player who was arrested on some foolishness, and the next thing you know, they tried to say that he killed himself he committed suicide while in the county jail. He worked on that case as a wrongful death, and then we all know he worked forever on the Geronimo Pratt case with him being a member of the Black Panthers and what have you, and dealing with all the things that Pratt was. He had trumped up charges of murder and what have you, and we know now from COINTELPRO that essentially that J. Edgar Hoover and his minions were doing all sorts of shenanigans to try to subvert what those freedom fighters were trying to get done in the 1960s and the 1970s. So at the end of the day, again, when you realize what Johnny Cochran was writing about, we're just now seeing it. And I actually think that's a good thing because we have real time. I think smartphones are so amazing, again, because now folks can cut on those phones, start recording whatever it is that they see and what have you. And eventually that's going to be a game changer. I mean, that's one part of the game change. But, man, I would be remiss if we moved on from this without me saying this. One thing we need black people to do a better job of is we have got to be engaged as jurors, man. I'm trying to tell you, I've tried well in excess of 150 serious felony cases. I'm talking about from capital murder, where they were trying to seek the death penalty, on down on through to rape, robbery, you name it. And what is interesting, brother, is that anytime I do a case, and Tallahassee is one of those cities where we have about a 38% black population, which is a pretty sizable population for a mid-sized city in the South. And in our surrounding areas, we have a pretty good African-American population as well. But, man, I tell you, on any given Monday when we pick juries, some of the first people with their hands up in the air to get off of jury duty are our own people, if you get where I'm coming from. And so at the end of the day, when you recognize that, and I mean, look, for any reason under the sun to try to not get on jury service. And I know that it's a burden for people to have to, sometimes spend a day or two away from work, away from their families and what have you, handling cases. But if you're sitting up and you're a keyboard warrior, you're talking about justice this, justice that, but when you get your jury summons, either you're trying to get out of it or you don't answer it, then how committed to justice are you really? And that's what I found to be a little bit unsettling, too, in terms of the verdict out there with Shelby in Tulsa, because I recognize that I believe there were 3 black people on that jury. And at the end of the day, I'm thinking to myself, like, how do you sit up and go back to your community as a person of color who sat on the jury on what, again, is a layup type of case? And I know that some people are like, well, Chuck, how do you know that? You didn't see this. You didn't see that. You weren't in the courtroom every day. Kysii, I've done this so long that, yeah, I know everything I need to know. The woman should have been found guilty of manslaughter at a minimum. I thought it was an appropriate charge for them to charge her with, and I thought that it would have been an easy slam dunk if you've got jurors who are committed to actual justice. But again, when you're seeing that this was not an all-white jury like it was in the Zimmerman case, but you've got some of us on it too that voted that way, man, that bothered me when I read that this morning. It bothered me But I wasn't shocked because I see it all of the time, if you get where I'm coming from. And we've got to do better than what we're doing right now when it comes to that.
Right.